latest and greatest life stories from people who are doing incredible disability advocacy work. Hello everybody, today we have the amazing honor of welcoming Curtis McGrath onto our Traipsing Global on Wheels podcast hour. August 23rd, 2012. That was the day it all changed for Curtis McGrath, a combat engineer with the Australian Army who had been deployed to Afghanistan a couple months earlier. McGrath stepped on an improvised explosive device, IED, while patrolling the Taliban-infested region. It detonated, taking both his legs with it. 18 months after this fateful day, Curtis was crowned world champion at the World Sprint Canoe Championships in Moscow, Russia. This has started his path to the Paralympics. In 2016, just over 4 years after losing his legs, Curtis, true to his word, not only made it to the Paralympics, but made history in becoming the first Australian to win a Paralympic gold medal in the para-canoe event at the 2016 Paralympic Games in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. Although the 2020 Tokyo Paralympic Games have been postponed, the goal remains the same, to defend the gold medal he won in Rio, but also add another with the V1 canoe being added to the Paralympic schedule. The Tokyo Games are going to be an amazing event. Curtis has picked up an impressive list of international awards, including being the first ever para-athlete to win the Sportsman of the Year award at the World Paddle Awards, the one Curtis is most proud of. As Curtis conveys, I'm the first Paralympic or para-canoe athlete to win the award and was against high-profile athletes from all over the world who have achieved a lot. It's been a very humbling time post-games, and there has been a lot of recognition for what I've achieved, but I'm just going out there and enjoying myself on the water, so to be recognized is really cool. Without further ado, let's listen in on my conversation with Curtis McGrath. Curtis McGrath, welcome to the Traipsing Global on Wheels podcast hour.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
I hope you're ready to talk and dive deep because we're going to cover a number of different topics. And I just want to let you know that if there are any questions that you're uncomfortable answering, you don't have to answer them, okay?
No worries. Cheers.
And so I just wanted, with the first question, I want to open with, you joined the disability community later in life, right, at age 24. So, and after being being an able-bodied person for 24 years. So do you feel that there is a large distance between you and the able-bodied community now due to attitudinal and infrastructural barriers that do exist?
I would say not as prevalent as what some other people might have experienced in the past. I've been pretty lucky to, have all the support networks around me support me through everything that I've tried to do and have encouraged me to do. And I think there's still a long way to go with infrastructural sort of requirements. And I think that's something that society's starting to get its head around and understanding that we're all, humans and we all have equal right to access a building or a facility or an activity. And I think that's something that is not going to change overnight, but there's some really good positive movement, but there's still a long way to go.
Yeah. And what are some myths or misconceptions that you've learned along the way that, able-bodied people have about individuals with disabilities? What prejudices and discriminations have you faced that you didn't necessarily have to deal with before, if relevant?
I guess it's organizations or situations which you're dealing with large like corporations that have set out their ways and have sort of stuck in their old ways. And I'm going to point the finger at maybe the aviation industry, and they're trying really hard to make it accessible and everything like that. But just the fact of I can't sit in an exit row on an aircraft because they deem me unable to be of assistance to lift the door out, if in the event of an emergency. But yet they'll get, a 75-year-old woman that doesn't look like she's been to the gym one day in her life, and she's allowed to sit there. And it's sort of like this assumption of ability just because I look different or I am different. And I'd understand that, if I was missing both my arms, there might be an issue there, or it's sort of the common sense approach doesn't always get applied to dealing with people's disabilities, and even just asking them. I think that's one of the things that I found that wasn't as normal. Asking people, what would you like? How would you like to do this? How do you think you can do this? Or, how can we help you do this? Rather than, no, you can't do this because, and it's sort of assuming that we're already just more disabled than what we actually are. And I wouldn't call it, personal discrimination. It's just a discrimination of stereotype. And, like I was saying at the start, it's still a long way to go there.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is systemic in structure. The structure is set in place, and the system is set in such a way that it is demeaning. I don't know about you, but I travel. I know you travel a lot too, and I also do in a wheelchair. And I think I use a wheelchair a lot more than you, seeing as I use it 100% of the time. But when you're traveling, just like having you all tied in and buckled in to get on the plane. I don't know how you get on the plane. You must use your prosthetics. That would
I do.
Easier.
Yeah.
If I were you, I would use your prosthetics. Anyways, I don't have that choice. And so you get like fastened down and buckled in, and sometimes they have 3 people helping you. And it's just I find it undignifying, that's not the word, but very demeaning. And I think technology can progress in such a way that we can function those things ourselves. Because for me, all I need is to go from the entry of the plane to my seat. And sometimes that distance is like 10 feet.
Yeah.
And so I think, especially with these days when we have like jetpacks and we have the internet where there's 14 hours of difference, 17 hours of difference, and we're conducting interviews from, a world away. I think if there were more attention paid to this kind of technology, it could definitely get done, because it's not rocket science. Technology has progressed to a point where a lot more complicated things have been done.
Yeah, for sure. And I just want to go at the point and just asking the person, what do they want as well? And I think that's really important to ask, to find out, how we can make this easier, but not overcomplicating it as well.
Yeah, exactly. Another similar question. So I know you do use your wheelchair part-time, especially at home. So do you feel that people treat you differently when you're sitting in a wheelchair in public versus standing up with your prosthetics? If yes, how so? And then this is a multi-pronged question, so I hope you have a good memory. What about mentally? Do you feel more confident standing up or sitting in a wheelchair? How does this confidence or lack thereof affect your social interactions when you're sitting down in a wheelchair versus standing up with your prosthetics?
Yeah. Firstly, I do notice a difference in being on my prosthetics to my wheelchair. I don't use my wheelchair very much, mainly because I understand and have seen it myself. The accessibility issues in which a wheelchair has around Australia and in the world, and that to me sort of makes things, me not want to use my wheelchair as much as my prosthetics, but at the same time it's easier as well. When I'm cooking and at home doing home tasks like cleaning and things like that, it's always on the prosthetics, because they're just more mobile. It's not, I don't know, 40 centimeters wide by 50 centimeters long. I don't need that space. I can be on my prosthetics and move around. And and carry things without having to push. And, that's it seems like an obvious thing, but when you have like a scorching hot cup of coffee in your hand and you try and push a wheelchair, it's actually quite a difficult task to not spill it on yourself and burn you and avoid things. So that's, just a functionality thing. But outside, there's, times where I have had to use my wheelchair, and that's because I've had like an infection or a skin wound or something like that on my leg, which, putting prosthetics on, and those who don't know how prosthetics work, for me, I use a liner. So it's like a silicone liner over my skin, and then my socket slides onto that, and then it's sort of held on. And I live in a hot country, and I compete in a summer sport, and that is obviously a hot location usually as well. So, sweating, and then there's infection problems and things like that. So being in my wheelchair allows my skin to heal a lot better. And I've noticed that, when you're getting around in a wheelchair, people look and are probably a little bit more aware that I have a disability. It's not as obvious if I was to wear my prosthetics around. When they do spot me, they have a little look, and that's fine. That's natural human curiosity. And, kids are always the funniest, and oh, look, Dad, he's got a robot leg and things like that. So that's quite cool. But, just and then the actual response to that from the parent is always really interesting, because sometimes like, oh no, don't do that. Like, sort of shaming the child for being curious about disability, rather than explaining the disability to the child, or explaining the amazing technology in which, disabled people are able to get around on. And I've got what are those things called? They hook onto the back of your axle and push your wheelchair around. It's like a motorized like little engine with a wheel on the back of it, and it hooks onto you. Yeah, and I've used that in the past out in public, and the kids are amazed. Oh, Dad, can we get one of them? And that's pretty cool to hear and to see and things like that. So it is a little bit different in terms of how people interact with you. And I would like people to interact exactly the same way as they'd interact with their best friend that is able-bodied, or things like that. And that's, again, one of those society things, that cultural sort of, it's slowly changing, but still a long way to go.
Yeah, exactly. I bet you've learned a lot along the way. So next I want to talk a little bit about disability technology, such as, your prosthetics and wheelchair, and just delve a little deeper into that. What type of wheelchair do you use, and what do you think could be improved to make it even better, to make your life easier?
Yeah. I use a Tylite. I actually don't know what model it's called. That's how much I know about wheelchairs. It's got blue wheels.
I wouldn't either, except I just purchased one. So it's a Tylite ZRA.
It's a ZR. That's what it is. I can just see the label. A ZR Tylite. And, it's made of titanium. It's very light. It's probably only like 9 kilos. And it's pretty comfy. I think one thing I'd like to change about it is that my wife sheds a lot of hair, and all the hair gets caught in the wheels, and it might not be anything to do with Rachel's hair. It could be someone else's that it just catches in the wheels. So I wish that that wouldn't happen as much. So, but other than that, I probably would put on maybe a cup holder, which would be good, so I could carry my hot cup of coffee. And yeah, I think that's pretty. They're fairly good now. Well, not that I've been in hospital and had the hospital wheelchairs, the big heavy things, and these ones here are pretty good. But it'd be nice to be able to pack it down really, really, really small. But understanding it, I'm quite a big guy, so I need quite a big wheelchair, and the frame and the wheels need to be as such. So the wheelchairs, because this is my second wheelchair. The other one I broke in transit, so on an aircraft, which is those things happen. I guess it's just the way it is.
Yeah, no, I've had a few of mine damaged as well. Yeah, I have the same problem, except it's not other people's hair, it's my own hair. And I just, take the wheels out every few months and clean it out.
Yeah.
That's a relatively easy fix if you know how to do it.
Yeah, for sure.
Being in a wheelchair in public, what are some things, physical infrastructure, what's the word I'm looking for? Just barriers that you've encountered?
Yeah, so an interesting thing is that I'm in a para-canoe team, so we do at an elite level. So we're accessing a facility that's just around the corner from my house, which is really great. And they provide for, the para-canoe team, but the actual building is not accessible. And I've not been in that building with a wheelchair, but I now see accessibility as a wheel sort of thing. So everything has to be rolled. And when I walk in, I have to walk over a curb or climb over a gate. And we do have we had a couple of athletes. We've got one athlete now who's in a wheelchair, and she uses her crutches in the building because it's just easier. And then because it's got upstairs, and that's where the disabled shower and toilet is, but it's a chair lift. So then someone has to carry the wheelchair up the stair. It's just not accessible. And I think, it's just common sense when it comes to accessibility. If you think that you're wheeling a trolley or a new fridge around into your building, that's when you start understanding, you can't get in here with a wheelchair. And I think that's a massive oversight, and I'd like to see it change, but we'll little baby steps, I think, for especially a national sporting institute. But for me, I remember I was over in Italy, was it the year before, and I had the infection on my leg, like I was saying, and I noticed that the paths around Italy are pretty hard work, and cobblestones are an absolute nightmare. So they're pretty hard to get around. You kind of want to just do a wheelie everywhere because the little wheels on the cobblestones do not work that well. And so that's probably one of those things. And then if people leave things lying around on the ground, and it might not be much, it might just be a little power cord, but that can almost throw you out of the wheelchair if you're not paying attention. So that sort of thing, just things that you don't think about. You just step over them otherwise, but not in a wheelchair.
Yeah. Exactly. I've encountered similar things. And I think I disagree with you on baby steps. I think we've taken baby steps for much too long. It's time for
sure.
Big, giant, bold steps. And I hope that, you can use your prominence to do that, Chris.
Yeah, I hope so.
I've been to Italy, Rome specifically, and other parts of Europe, and there's cobblestone everywhere. My back ache because I just did wheelies everywhere, and I was doing solo travel, and so it got very exhausting. It's very exhausting to travel in a manual wheelchair by yourself, but it was also very fun. Anyway, so the other question I have for you, which I was curious about, is where do you put your prosthetics or wheelchair when you're out canoeing or kayaking, so that you can access it later, or you're not stranded when you come back?
Yeah, it's a bit of a precarious situation because I don't use my wheelchair unless we are at a competition. And the reason why I do that is that the infrastructure at the competitions is very good for wheelchairs, and the ramps are nice and gradual slopes, and the pontoons are very low, whereas the ramp for our pontoon here is very, very steep, and it's even steeper on a low tide because it sort of moves. And so I just use prosthetics. So I just take them off and literally just leave them on the pontoon with the towel over top of them. So it's it's been a couple of times where I've noticed a couple of fishermen on the pontoon, and they would have spotted the legs and been like, what the hell? Like, this is, someone's legs are just laying here. And I'll do, 12 Ks, and I'll be away for an hour and 20 minutes and then come back. And thankfully so far, touch wood, no one's pinched them or taken them. But there was a situation when I was in Canberra, which is not, that's like almost 1,200 kilometers away from here, which is our nation's capital. And I went out for like just a casual paddle by myself. And I have another set of legs that I use to get in and out of the boat on a beach. Just, it saves, having to clean them and pull the legs apart and putting them back together. And they're just like very sort of simple. They're just pretty much a knee hinge and then like a solid foot. So no sand or anything gets in. You just spray them down with a hose, and they're really good. But I had them, and I put them on the shore, and then did a paddle, and I was probably like 2 or 3 Ks away, and I saw it, and I was turning around to come back, and I could see a car had pulled up on the beach, and being 2 Ks away, that's quite a long way away, and I could see people just in the distance walk over to where my legs were, and then walk back to their car, and then play around and have kids and dogs and stuff. And I, my heart sank, because I was like, they've just put my legs in their car, and I was going as fast as I could, but I couldn't go any faster than what my body was able to push me. And I got to the shore and said like, "Oh, can I have my legs back, please?" And they were like, "Oh yeah, we just took them out of the way for the dogs and the kids, so they didn't play with them." And I was like, right, yeah, okay. Like, why didn't you just pull the dogs and kids away from them and play over that way? And that was the only situation in which someone's moved my legs or tried to take my legs whilst I've been out paddling. So it's probably a very good lesson there to not do that.
Yeah. I think every obstacle is also an opportunity in some ways, and so perhaps we can systemize that in some way and create a place where people can set them securely, just like there are bike racks and there are
Exactly.
other similar things that there are little hooks for purses when you go to restaurants. Maybe we can create such a system for prosthetics. And unlike shoes that people wear, wheelchairs are like basically your legs. Prosthetics are your legs, and so they're quite important. And if you lose them, it's not easy to obtain one easily.
No, not at all, and not one that's specially built and designed for your size and things like that. So we've been working with our facility manager to try and get like a storage box that locks up, so we can put our prosthetics and things of valuable nature in them. So it's a little bit of a work in progress there.
Yeah. Anyway, so I think hopefully somebody will be able to come up, maybe someone even listening to this podcast will be like, oh, there's a void that needs to be filled. Because I know even in Australia, 1 in 5 people, I think, have a disability there as well.
Yeah. It's quite a large number of people. And, like you said, opening this podcast today about, I've acquired my disability later on in life. And it's one of those exclusive clubs that anyone can become a part of at any time, and that needs to be thought about in a more wider sense, that anyone at any time could acquire a disability, and that needs to be thought of.
Exactly. So I'm gonna move on to family and relationships. Everyone's favorite topic. So do you feel there is a disconnect or a gap between your disability world and your partner's able-bodied world now that you were a part of before? Are you two able to connect emotionally like you used to, even though your lived experiences, even on a daily basis, and the people you would have normally interacted with have changed? I don't know, for you two personally, maybe it hasn't changed all that much, maybe it has, or do you feel that it really, she just understands you so well that the change in vantage point and the big big things that you've encountered, big obstacles, haven't really affected that relationship?
So I think now we're at a different stage after acquiring my disability. I think initially it was very difficult to try and sort of understand my comfort with intimacy and also with affection, and that was really difficult in the early stages. Trying to learn my body again and be comfortable with it, and as I said before, living in a hot country means, obviously it's warm, and I explained the prosthetic situation before, the liners, and then the socket over top, and you sweat in that, and then I'm missing skin from my legs to radiate heat, so my cooling, my thermoregulation, my body's a little bit askew, so I get hot and sweat quite quickly, and I feel a little bit yuck, and then I don't want to be hugged or anything like that. So that's one of those things that I've had to sort of learn, and so has Rachel, to to be accepting of my space that I would like, but also at the same time, having a disability, I felt that I was not worthy of her initially, and it was a very personal, and I'm not putting this on anyone else. This is just my experiences and how I felt about it, because I felt like I was broken. I was, not 100%. I'm not good enough, and things like that. And that's very hard to explain to someone about those feelings and how that can then relate to your interactions with that person. So it took us a long time to come to terms. Well, myself, it's not really Rachel, it's all me, and my feeling about me, and being happy with my mentality and sort of psychic about my disability. And for me, I just sort of started thinking about the things that I could do, and trying to look at how we could interact and be together. And in the bigger picture, now looking back in hindsight, none of those fears and what I had at that time are actually relevant anymore. There's something that I just had to learn to adapt to and get on with it. And that took some realization and some sort of aha moments and moving on. But I think understanding, like you were saying before, about getting around Rome and how tiring having a disability can be, just to do normal things. And there's a bit of a statistic getting around, I'm not sure how accurate it is, but they say like a double amputee requires 60% more energy to do the exact same task or move around the same area as an able body would. And that's mainly because we just don't have the leg muscles and the efficiency of the human leg, and that's just one of those biomechanic things that we have to pay for. And being very, very tired at the end of the day is almost compounded to the fact that I am being an athlete as well as a disabled person, and me not allowing my tired state to affect my interactions, and having Rachel understand that she is very accepting of any sort of I don't know, disagreement, or just being happy with what you've got currently, and enjoying life as it is. So yeah.
I think what you just described is somebody who's newly injured, especially as big of a change as you experienced back in 2014. 2012,
yeah.
2012, is that's something other people experience, whether it's stepping on an IED, like in your situation, or going skiing and falling down from a mountain, and being in a relationship. Like, those people experience those vulnerabilities and those very real and raw emotions, and they battle that with themselves. And so I think talking it out, and like, oh, Curtis McGrath, has had those insecurities as well, and overcame them and worked through it with his partner. And because I've talked to other people as a person with disabilities, having interacted with a lot of individuals with disabilities, they also have those kinds of challenges and those kind of insecurities and vulnerabilities. And I'm glad you're, you know, very open about sharing, and I think that empowers more people as well to see the light.
Yeah, it definitely is a fact of working through things and not sort of closing yourself down, and understanding that there is a difference in your life, and understanding that there still can be something there with that person, that relationship, and as long as they're accepting and, you know, comfortable with your I don't know, your insecurities, and helping you work through them and discussing them, and trying different things. I think that's one of the big things you have to be able to do. Otherwise, it's just, you know, it's going to be hard work, and you're going to hit brick walls all the time. But just keep trying new things, and you'll find something that works.
Yeah. And I think you found the right partner too, because
Yeah, yeah.
sometimes when something happens like that, people may not have the right partner. They may not have been in the relationship for the right reasons in the first place. And
That's correct.
so,
Yeah.
like, two hearts didn't connect for the right reasons. And then something big happens, um, and then they jump out, and which in the end is for the best. But then it puts that person in a further deeper funk because they think it was them, when it was really because they fundamentally didn't really connect for the right reasons.
Yeah, you know, I can't commend Rachel enough for her acceptance of me, and the change in which we've both had in our life. And I've been, you know, lucky to have Rachel through the whole incident before, you know, and then going through the rehabilitation, and then learning to walk, and then onto sport, and things like that. And it's been, you know, a tough road, but she's, you know, been with me through it all, and I'm very grateful for that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's great. It definitely sounds like you found a gem. Has interactions or things that you normally would do before changed now, after 2012, after the injury, even, and I'm not just talking about the physicalities of it all
Yeah.
as well. Yeah, I'm having trouble even explaining it, so that means it's not a great
Yeah.
question.
That's all right. I guess the certain things that I used to do before, and now I don't do, is, you know, I live in a beach city, and one of the places that, you know, you would think you'd go a lot living in a beach city. It would be kind of like living in California, or Florida, or something like that, and Miami, and not going to the beach at all, because it's not a place in which I enjoy, because of the difficulty in accessing the water's edge. And I love, you know, being in the water and being in the waves and things like that, although massive storm waves are hitting the coast at the moment, so it's not a good place to be. But the and Rachel really likes going to the beach, and I'm like, yeah, no, I don't really want to do that. And having that sort of understanding of, you might not have to do, or might compromise and do things that other people don't want to do, because or the other people want to do, but you don't want to do it, and vice versa. And that needs to be something that's discussed through, and understanding, you know, it might be an insecurity, or it might be an ability thing that you're just not comfortable with. And, you know, me doing an activity outside in the middle of summer here is a pretty sweaty affair, and I'd prefer not to have to expose myself to do that. But at the same time, there's certain compromises in which you have to make, just to you know, have a balanced relationship, for sure.
Yeah. So earlier you were saying, shortly after you acquired your disability, you felt like a broken person. You weren't, worthy of her. So did you feel that you have to overcompensate in any way, shape, or form due to any, insecurities caused by your disabilities to your girlfriend, parents, or friends? Just broadening that scope. If
Yeah.
yes, can you give us some vivid examples and tell us how you worked through it all?
I think the answer to that question for me is no. I worked, with everyone, and everyone worked with me in order to recover and rehabilitate. and to get better. And that was my pure and like so focused goal right from the get-go, that I was trying to get better, and having that sort of goal-orientated mindset allowed me to not show other people, but tell other people, this is what I'm doing, and if you want to help me do that, let's go together. And that enabled them, and then to understand me and my mindset about what I was trying to do and how I wanted to spend my time, on a day-to-day basis. But then when it comes to the things that I used to do and couldn't do anymore, I would sort of just push them aside and keep going. And that was one of the things that it's difficult because, like we were saying, like the things we used to do or I used to do now I can't do, not can't, but just haven't, got around to addressing that challenge. And that challenge for me right now, I really, really, really wanted to go skiing this winter down south in the mountains, but because of the COVID situation, it's sort of made going over to the next state over is difficult, and the equipment hire and all that sort of thing. And then having Rachel and my friends understand that I can't go because of the COVID, but they can go because their equipment and their state is fine. And understanding that, I'm missing a couple of limbs, but at the same time, I've got like 4 sets of legs that no one else has got. And I've managed to rehabilitate and use the goal-orientated process mindset to focus on something and get through it. And that helps them understand also why I'm pushing that way, or not pushing, but working towards. And that's been a very interesting thing for me to learn about myself, because before I got injured, I had no idea that I was so goal orientated. I was, just easy come, easy go, lucky, happy go lucky guy, and just go with the flow. But when I would set myself to do something, I would, try and do it to my best of ability. And that wasn't apparent to me until you're met with a severe adversity, situation. And that then becomes apparent that you are quite goal orientated. I'm not sure if that quite answers your question, but jump
No,
around
it
there.
did. It definitely did. Thank you. I think, I've had many of the same situations because you have more mobility and options than me. Like I said, I use a wheelchair 100% of the time. And so, so I can definitely relate to, especially the situation you just described of going skiing and, not being able to do that due to various factors. So, just the last question under this section is, how has attending and participating in social events changed for you? For example, such as dancing. I know that's an area that's tricky for me and kind of, I find embarrassing sometimes.
It is. I think dancing's one of those ones that is difficult. Probably one of the most difficult and socially difficult things to do. And I feel very awkward on the dance floor because my feet don't work the same way as they used to, and it's being on a wheelchair, it's even harder. And I remember this one time I was at a friend's wedding and we went to a pub after, and like I was in a suit so no one could tell that I had a disability, and I'd ordered 2 beers from the bar, and I turned around and there was a bit of like liquid on the floor, and I slipped and I just fell straight down, and both beers like smashed out of my hands, and I could hear people laughing, and that made me very, very upset. But they didn't understand, and I had to come to terms with what they saw, their perspective, and then that then made me okay with what happened, if that makes sense. So because of their understanding, they made a quick judgment and they were wrong, and you have to be aware of that, them being wrong, and you knowing what you've done or how that happened, and then moving on from that and understanding that, you know, it's just an ignorance thing or a naivety. I'm not sure which one it falls into, but yeah, being, you know, in that situation, it did make me realize that people are so quick to judge and so quick to, you know, assume things. And that then led me on to thinking about, you know, just getting out there and enjoying it. And like I said before, is, you know, being happy with yourself and enjoying what you're doing rather than what other people are doing. And that's a very difficult thing to do. And I don't think there's a human on the planet that actually doesn't care what other people think. There's still that little, you know, otherwise we wouldn't wear clothes, you know, we just do whatever we want and drive on the other side of the road because we want to, you know. It's not like that. We have to, you know, you have to conform to some sort of societal norms, but at the same time, it's being comfortable with yourself rather than, you know, really doing, you know, whatever you want. So
Yeah. Just it's always that balance of, you know, doing giving yourself the freedom to live the life you want, but also
yes.
ensuring the safety and, you know, the boundaries of others, respecting that.
Yeah.
Moving on to household chores, I'm sure Rachel will be happy we're covering this. How has your disability affected how you to distribute household chores? You know, how's your cooking? Have you needed to adapt anything in your house to enable you to, you know, live in a way that you're able to do everything you want, and conduct your life in such a way that it's not constraining in that one spouse is doing one thing more than the other?
Rachel's going to find this quite funny because I'm actually the one that's more the household chore person and I cook the most. And
Oh, really?
yeah, so it's probably because I don't get so flustered as quickly as she does. It's quite funny because we've got a friend's barbecue this afternoon, and Rachel's very good at baking. But when it comes to cooking, so baking is more of a science. You put a cup and a half of flour and a teaspoon of salt, and that's very, like, that's set. Whereas cooking, you sort of go with the flow and let it sort of evolve as you go through it. And that's somewhere where Rachel was like, it's not right. It's not the right, it's, you know, the meat's undercooked. And I was like, yeah, because you didn't cook it long enough. So, no, it said 15 minutes. So, but it's not cooked. So that sort of thing. And which is, you know, always funny to watch. But at the same time, you know, Rachel was very, very tidy and will come into my office and rearrange my desk, and I get quite annoyed with that and trying to make it look all pretty and things. And she's very, very good at styling things and making things look good. And whereas I'm more about, you know, the functionality of the area and having the ability to do what I want to do. And one thing that I wish we could change in our house is that the clothesline outside to do the washing. It is in a place where I can get to in my wheelchair, but the clothesline's really high. So I'm just like, oh, I have to do that on my legs, or we just put it on a clothes rack in the bedroom. And that's what we've been doing. And that works. But also, like Rachel, she's an ICU doctor, so she's not at home as much as I am. You know, I'm an athlete and I'm, you know, doing a bit of study. So I'm here quite a lot, especially this year, obviously. Yeah, and then we're renovating a wall, so we're like going to paint it and things like that. So just doing things, and I painted a pergola sort of things over the on our deck the other day or the other month, and you know, I'm still able to get out there and do things and be of contribution to the household, which is, I think, in a way quite fulfilling because you're like I said, contributing to the house to make it function and put the bins out when they need to go out. And yeah, so but I can understand and can see how there would be an assumption of role reversal, and people often think that Rachel looks after me, but I think I've taken the words out of her speech from our wedding, is that I look after her. So yeah, it's really funny.
Yeah. And then, wow, that is insightful. So what about when it comes to, I know this is probably further along in the future with having family. Do you have any hesitations there with raising kids?
Yes and no. I feel that kids is something that currently we're not looking at in any way, shape, or form. It's mainly due to our current ambitions. Like Rachel wants to finish her study and become an ICU consultant. So that obviously being a doctor in this current environment is pretty tough, but that allows her to be very focused and get through the training and all the different levels in which she has to attain to get there. And then for me, obviously Tokyo Games would have been coming up really soon, and you would have been talking to me from Italy if everything was okay. But it's not, and I'm here in Australia, and so that has allowed me to pick up a bit more study, and it'd be nice to do some more public speaking, but that's just the way it is at the moment. And so at the moment, we're just thinking about our current goals and ambitions, and then that sort of pushes aside any additional members to the family, which is, it's what it is. But never say never. We'll never know, but we will know one day. But it'll be in the future. So yeah, yes, but no is the current answer to that question.
Yeah, it's been really enjoyable talking to you, and thank you so much for being insightful. I've learned a lot from you. I think I can definitely learn from you in respect to being driven and goal setting and motivation and being humble for sure. You have lots of reasons not to be humble and have a big ego, and yeah, you definitely don't. And so I appreciate that. And thank you so much for giving us an hour of your time as well.
It's my pleasure, Ming. No, thank you very much. And it's been lovely to talk to you as well. So yeah, have a good day.
Did you like this video? If so, share it with your friends and be sure to follow us on social media. And if you want even more resources, be sure to sign up for our email updates on our website, traipsingglobal.com. Keep learning new perspectives, keep being inclusive, because it will make the world a better place for you and for everyone else. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you on another episode of the Traipsing Global on Wheels podcast hour.